Hello and welcome to this, our 31st live stream. 'Twas the night before Christmas. We put a poll up last week asking if our viewers wanted us to hold this live stream on Thursday or on Christmas Eve, and 71% chose to do it tonight on the Thursday. So that is why we've got a little bit of a schedule change. And we'll probably do the same thing next week too, given that Christmas usually coincides with New Year's Eve as well. So with that said, for this week and next week, we're probably going to be doing this on Thursdays. So with that slight schedule change, we are going to get into it. The instructions are on the scroll bar below, but just for anyone who's new to this live stream, the way it works is that super chats have priority. If you don't want to have give a super chat but still want to ask a question, we do take non-super chat questions, and we ask that you prefix the question with a Q and a colon, so that I know that the question is directed to me. And please, 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 only post the question once, so I know as I'm scrolling through it if I've answered it or not. Also, if it's a question regarding a foreign word or a Bible verse, please include what you think the foreign word means or the Bible verse, so that I have some context to actually answer the question. So, with that said, let's get into it. Our first question comes from Timotus Niara. When did the Philistines appear, and is there a dating conflict with Isaac making a covenant with Abimelech, king of the Philistines? Genesis 26:1. Now, Genesis 26:1 says, and I quote, "There was a famine in the land, besides the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. So Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines." Okay. So that's the context. Now, prior to coming on to the live stream here, I did a little bit of lower textual criticism work of this, and I found some very interesting things about this particular passage. The Gerar, in, say, the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Septuagint, they add on to the end of this, king of Philistines unto Gerar. Now, Gerar is actually in the Negev. It's actually in that desert region in the south of Canaan. And it's in the northwestern portion, almost sort of dead east of Beersheba. And what's so interesting about this is that it is it's sort of the traditional homeland of the Palisettes, or where the original sort of tribe of the Philistines. Now, when we talk about the Philistines, we got to keep kind of two things in mind. There is a original tribal group called the Palisette, from which we get the term Philistine. But I see a little here. Audio's a bit low. I'm going to pump it up just a little here. Okay, is that better? It's sort of redlining for me at this point. Oh, okay. Is that audio better? So, Warrior of the Most High, if you hear this, please respond, because you seem to be... Oh, I also see Warrior of the Most High say it as well. Okay, we're good. All right. So I just had to tap the audio. I got a weird audio interface, and it's very tetchy. It's very, very tetchy. You know, it's kind of like one of those showers with a bad handle. You know, that freezing, boiling. It's kind of one of those things. So, it's not a loose cable. It's not a loose cable, Mr. Rich B.O.B. It's a tetchy. It's the switches is just feather trigger kind of deal. Okay, so we're good now. Excellent. Okay. So I was saying that Gerar, which is being mentioned in this passage, is in the northwest of the Negev, eastish of Beersheba, and it's the sort of the tribal um, homeland of the Paliset. Now, when we talk about the Philistines, we are actually, in many ways, talking about two different things. We are talking about, say, there's the original Philistines. The core tribe of Philistines was called the Paliset, from which we get the word Philistine and Palestine. But later on, too, uh, Philistine also becomes sort of a catch bucket term for all the tribes of the Sea People, like the Sheridan, the Duden, the Luca, the Meshwesh. There's a bunch of these Sea People tribes. Now, as far as the we do know that some of these tribes are definitely Sea Peoples that came down from Anatolia and invaded the coastal plain. The Duden, the Sheridan, the Luca, definitely those are Sea Peoples. One of those tribes that sort of is questionable as to their origins is the Paliset. We aren't exactly sure of the origins of the Paliset. Now, we are aware that later on, the Paliset sort of take on the material culture of say the Sea Peoples. But there is a possibility that the Paliset were existed in Canaan prior to the invasion of the Sea Peoples, and they sort of more or less throw in their lot with the Sea Peoples. They just sort of join forces with them. You know, if you can't beat them, join them. That sort of thing. So, there's definitely some possibility. And we do find that the earliest mentions of, say, Sea People tribes is found in the Amarna letters, and that dates to about 1350 BC. So, this is actually much, much earlier than what conventional archaeology says is the origin of the Sea Peoples. We also see Sea Peoples mentioned, tribes of the Sea Peoples mentioned in, say, the Kadesh reliefs, as well as the great stela, victory stela of Merneptah. So these again are all earlier than what conventional archaeology suggests is the origin of these tribes. So given that we already have, say, origins that are much predate, say, the conventional archaeological dating for the Philistines, it just strikes me that maybe the Paliset are even older than that. Now, I wouldn't say that of the other tribes of Sea Peoples, but I think for the Paliset, it's very, very possible. And given where the location of Gerar, as denoted by both the Septuagint and the Samaritan Pentateuch, I think there's some strong suggestion here that this is the original Philistines. Now, one of the interesting things about this too is, say, the Septuagint translates the Philistines here as aloi philoi, other nations, other nations. So Septuagint is a little bit sort of hedging its bets, even though it's not aware of all the archaeological information. So even the scholarship that went into the Septuagint, there does seem to be some sort of connotation, at least in Second Temple period scholarship, that Philistines here means as a broader meaning than just, say, the Paliset or the Sea Peoples, but could be many other nations as well. And this may be just sort of a retrojective term that is used to apply to just what you would call goyim, other nations, non-Jewish nations. So there's several possibilities as to what's going on here in this particular passage. Anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Very interesting question. Okay, a second question here from F.H. Sanders. You mentioned in a previous stream that even mummies show signs of hunger. Could you point me to the study and any other study on starvation in ancient Egypt? Okay, I will actually give you the citation here of the study I got this from. And it is A.T. Sanderson and Edmund Tapp, 2 P's, and the article is Disease in Ancient Egypt, and it's collected in the anthology Mummies, Disease, and Ancient Cultures, edited by Thomas Aidan Cockburn, Eve Cockburn, and Theodore A. Ryman. It's a Cambridge University Press publication, 1998, page 39. So there's the citation. Anyway, thank you for that question. Okay, our third non-super chat is from the other Paul. Good to see you, friend. If courses on logic were made mandatory for biblical and historical degrees, how much would the current state of scholarship change in your opinion? Quite a bit, honestly. I think there's a lot of historical method and biblical method right now that often is just, say, logically fallacious. And it shouldn't be that way. There's enough published out there that criticizes these methods that there's a whole lot here that could be improved, just tightened up. That's one of the things I think has come out of a lot of modern historical method is some pretty slack methods, some sloppiness, really. It's even worse in biblical studies. So I think if basic courses on, say, logic or philosophy were mandatory, I think we would see, just instead of, say, the normal primers that, say, arts students get, and arts and humanities students, I mean here, which are, say, more courses on, say, just only, say, core literature studies like Marxism, gender studies. That seems to be a lot of what's going into, say, Arts 1 teaching. And what I mean by Arts 1 is oftentimes arts and humanities students have to go through a standard program called Arts 1, which is basically a literature survey, a year-long literature survey. And it almost covers your entire course load, where you're having to take gender studies, as I said, Marxism, a little bit on, say, classical literature. And I think you need more than that to be well-grounded in the humanities. I think logic, especially informal logic, symbolic logic, proper argumentation, I think these are essential for the cultivation of good, not just good historical and biblical method, but also just critical thinking skills. So, anyway, thank you very much for the question. Great question. And next one. Question. Okay. This is from Charlie Don't Surf 334. Well, that's very unfortunate you don't surf. I hear it's a lot of fun. What do you think of Jordan Peterson's lectures on Genesis 1 to 15, specifically with respect to eisegesis and exegesis? In my honest opinion, it is interesting. It is an interesting new perspective, but it does seem to be eisegesis. And, I would agree. It does seem to be eisegesis to me, too. It does strike me that he's very much taking a Jungian system of thought and pouring it, reading the Bible through that Jungian lens. Now, it's very interesting. It's very interesting, but it's not necessarily good biblical interpretation. And Peterson is not a biblical scholar. He's a psychologist. He's a clinical psychologist. I respect Jordan Peterson as far as his clinical psychology goes. I think his use of Jungian psychology, especially in, say, broaching archetypes, is very interesting and does have some application to biblical archetypes, because there are archetypes in the Bible. However, I also think you can press this too far, where you sort of, you miss the forest for the trees. So, I think there's an overall message that he sometimes misses here. I do pray for him. I think Jordan Peterson is just this close to becoming Christian. He's sort of on that precipice. He's at that existential crisis of say the mythical and the material meeting and touching, and the question is, how is he going to resolve that existential crisis? And there's two ways to resolve that existential crisis. Through embracing the Savior, or through denial of reality. So we'll see what happens in the future with him. I don't recommend his materials generally. So, but I do see some value in it too. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very interesting. Okay, let's fire up our Steam here, or Twidget. Okay, and we have one super chat here. The first super chat here from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Hi, Dr. Falk. Do you think the Gospels were from eyewitnesses or passed down orally then written? For the most part, I think they were eyewitnesses. Now, we do have, for example, the Gospel of John, which is an eyewitness. He's one of the apostles, and he's one of the inner circle of apostles. The Gospel of Matthew. Matthew is also an apostle. Not one of the inner circle, but he's still an apostle, so he was an eyewitness. Mark was a student of Paul, but was said to have seen a lot of, say, what happened. Luke, on the other hand, didn't witness the events himself, but what he does is he goes interviews actual people who witnessed it. We even have, say, some things like in Eusebius, where it talks about eyewitnesses who saw this. So there were several eyewitnesses to the Gospels and to the life of Jesus Christ. So I think one of the things we have to realize here that early first century Christianity, prior to, say, the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, was a Jerusalem phenomena. It was essentially a Jerusalem phenomena. So any gospel produced prior to 70 AD would have had to face sort of the scrutiny of those who've been there and saw it. And the Gospel of Mark definitely was produced before 70 AD, and probably also so the Gospel of Matthew as well. So here we have, say, two Gospels that are pre-70 AD that would have had to face that sort of review of people who knew, saw, and witnessed these events. And it's a very hard scrutiny to try to sort of get past, because the events are between 70 AD and, say, the death of Jesus Christ in around 30 AD isn't that great. It's only a 40-year gap. So I don't think there was enough time here for the Gospels to be passed down orally, but I think we just say, and there's even been some recent suggestions that Mark may have been written as early as 33, 35 AD. So, I mean, I think that's very low. I think that's a very low date. And there's some very compelling arguments for that, but, I don't know if I throw my hat on that side of the ring yet. But definitely by 50 AD, you have the Gospel of Mark. So, I think what we have from the Gospels is definitely eyewitness testimony. And at least for the most part. Some of it isn't, but that's okay because he's using his sources. Imagine that. I mean, Luke basically says that he consults sources who saw and witnessed and touched the Messiah. It's just like, okay, yeah, okay, that's what we would, a good researcher uses credible sources, and I think Luke here is doing that. So, absolutely. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, and the second one here, next super chat, is from, switch it up here. There we go. All right, from Brick Creation again for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What evidence would people expect for a Davidic and Solomonic kingdom? Do we need a lot of evidence? How big was it? Well, that's the $1,000,000 question. We do know that there was a Davidic and Solomonic kingdom. We do know that by this point. We've got the palace, the 10th century palace of Solomon, in the city of David. There's does seem to be an administrative apparatus that's happening during this time. The only question that sort of remains here is how big was it? How expansive was it? And when we see sort of Hebrew abecedaries, and these are lists of Hebrew, the Hebrew alphabet, essentially. And people did this as a writing exercise. They would write out the alphabet in order. So we do see Hebrew abecedaries quite distant from Jerusalem. So there does seem to be substantial evidence that goes quite beyond it. I mean, even as far as the Shephelah, we've already seen evidence of, say, Davidic and Solomonic influence. Solomon, his stables were sort of recovered at Megiddo. So there's enough here to show that this kingdom was actually very expansive. And even if the Davidic kingdom wasn't quite so expansive, the Solomonic kingdom certainly was. Almost certainly. So we don't need the evidence because the evidence is there. Okay? There's enough evidence to show that these kingdoms, at least the Solomonic one, was very expansive. And even the Davidic one is as I said, already pushing into the Shephelah. So it does seem to at least go up to the Jezreel Valley. That seems to be the minimum of its northern extent. Southern extent, it's going to the at least as far south as Eilat. So it's hitting the sea at the Gulf of Aqaba. So that's the southern extent of it, and then it's pushing sort of westward, not quite up to Gaza. It doesn't take Gaza. They don't take Gaza. But it is pushing in that direction. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. Tony G for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. I came for the Egyptian beer. Merry Christmas, Dr. Falk. Well, Merry Christmas to you, too. Wish I had Egyptian beer. Oh, I miss a beer. I should make another batch of that stuff, but no, I don't have any Egyptian beer. But have a virtual whiskey on me. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Merry Christmas to you also. Okay, Tony G for $9.99. Thank you again for this super chat. Who was Akhenaten? Did he remember Joseph and the monotheistic religion with Aten worship and his own Semitic vizier? And why is his visage figure so odd? Okay. Now, who was Akhenaten? He was the second son. He's not the firstborn. He was the sort of the second son second in line to the throne of Amenhotep III. He does not seem to have been raised in the royal court for some reason. For some reason, his mother sort of, raised him away from the royal court. Not exactly sure why, but maybe it was his deformity. Who knows? He did not. I wouldn't say he remembered Joseph or the monotheistic religion with Aten worship and his own Semitic vizier. Now, he did have a Semitic vizier. He had an Asiatic as a vizier. But his monotheistic religion isn't exactly monotheist. And I think this is one of the sort of the big misconceptions about Akhenaten. Is a lot of people think he's a monotheist. And some of this comes out of 19th century thinking about religious categories. Now, you had 19th century archaeologists discover Atenism, and Petrie, started this. Petrie excavates Akhenaten, which is the capital city at Amarna, and he's excavating Atenism, and he says, wow, they're only worshiping one god there. Must be monotheist. So Petrie starts this. And Cyril Aldred, picks this up and popularizes this. But now when we look at the texts of Atenism, we don't see monotheism. Because what we see here is something very, very different than monotheism. We do see monolatry, which is you worship one god. But that's not the same as saying there is one god. Atenism seems to recognize the existence of other gods, but says you should only worship one, which is the Aten. The other thing about Atenism, too, is Atenism sees itself in everything. All other gods are manifestations of Aten. I'm Aten. You're Aten. The world is Aten. Aten breathes life in all things. Aten is everything. All is Aten. Well, that's not monotheism. That's pantheism. So, Akhenaten isn't remembering Israelite monotheism, or say Semitic, even Semitic henotheism. It's not remembering any of that. It's doing something new here, something very, very different. And I think we have to keep that in mind as we sort of examine Atenism, is that what it's prescribing here is really pantheistic. So, even though he had a Semitic vizier, it does seem to be that his vision of religion is much more, say, everything is a manifestation of the Aten. Now, your final question. Why is his figure so odd? We don't know, honestly. It does seem to be very, very much related to an art style. An art style that seems to come out of his particular religion, his Atenism. There does seem to be an androgyny to the Aten cult. So, women can be converted, can be saved by being transformed into men. Men take on female characteristics in Atenism. So there's an androgyny in, say, Atenist religion that seems to also be expressed in the artistic style of the Amarna period. So it's not only you don't only see this figure seen in, say, images of, say, Akhenaten. You also see it expressed in, say, Tutankhamun. His daughters have this art style expressed. His viziers, his officials, his scribes. Everybody who's being depicted during the Amarna period seems to have this sort of figure or androgyny. So it isn't just that it's his personal, say, body style, but there does seem to be a religious agenda behind the artwork. And this is, yeah. Well, we don't notice it as much. We don't notice it as much because we don't see the iconography of generally of, say, his administrators and lower officials, but it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere in the art style of the Amarna period. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Right. Slam RN for $10. Thank you very much. Good to see you here. Okay. What can you tell me about Migdal Eder, the shepherds, the manager, and the swaddling cloths? Okay, Migdal Eder, I'm not sure what that means. I know what Migdol is. I don't know what the Migdal Eder is. The shepherds, the manger, and the swaddling clothes. Okay, the shepherds, these are basically, shepherds are, how do I put this? Shepherds in the ancient Near East are often misunderstood. They're your equivalent of truck drivers. They're tough guys. The Hellenistic era has and say or late Roman period kind of treated shepherds, in say Latin verse, as sort of these sort of effeminate, weaklings. That's not the image of shepherds. Shepherds are gruff, tough guys. They're tough guys. They're out in the fields. They're enduring hard conditions. They're having to protect the flocks from wolves and bears and lions and predators. Oh my. And they're living it rough. Okay? So that's sort of the context of shepherds is they're the tough guys. David comes in and he says, Saul asked him, well, you're who do you think you are going up against Goliath, a giant? And David says, hey, you know what? I killed a bear and a lion with my bare hands. So it's like okay. Slam RN here clarifies this. Okay, the Migdal Eder was the tower outside Bethlehem where the shepherds watched over the flocks of the Passover lambs. Well, I'm not so aware of that. I mean, I know Migdal means tower, but I had not heard that was where they watched it before. But most of the times, the shepherds are going to be out in the fields. They're going to be out in the fields with their flocks. They didn't usually hole up in towers. Now, they might have used a tower like that as a way station. Because that could have been. Because shepherds did have way stations. The manger is a feeding trough. It's a feeding trough. The inn where the manger was held. Now, in most ancient Near Eastern houses, and this is true of Israel houses, they're generally constructed where there are two floors. Cooking, cleaning, daily life happened on the bottom floor. You bring your sort of your cattle or your livestock into the house at night, and livestock lived on the bottom floor with everyone else. And then on the top, the top floor was where your bedrooms were. That was where everyone slept. Okay, so that's your typical construction of a Semitic house. Now, what an inn was essentially a place where you could stop and sleep on that bottom floor with the cattle, okay, and the sheep, okay? Now, that's not where Mary gave birth. There's a side sort of place where they stored hay, and where they fed the cattle, said cattle. And that's where Mary was, and Joseph, when she gave birth. In that the inn was full, the bottom floor was full, so they had to go into that side sort of sloping, more like a half height barn. Really, maybe 4 or 5 feet tall barn. That's what this is, which held hay and chaff and grain for food, not for people, but for the cattle. And the manger is the feeding trough. So that's what's happening there. And the swaddling clothes is just essentially just a loose wrap. That's all that is. Whatever they happen to have on hand to wrap the child in. So that's sort of the archaeological context of say the Holy Birth. Is that, they didn't even get to sleep with the cattle in the house. The sheep in the house. They got to sleep outside with the rats. Honestly, that's sort of what's going on there. So it's not pleasant. It is a really lowly birth. It's not a birth that you would expect for the King of Kings, which is why you have that contrast there. He did not come as, say, a king coming into his kingdom in glory, but as the lowest of peasants. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and have a Merry Christmas. Okay. Manuel Picardo for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Merry Christmas, Dr. Falcon family. Well, thank you very much. Well, Merry Christmas to you too. Very much appreciate the super chat. It's and the well wishes for the season. Yeah, it's been busy. It's been very, very busy, and I do appreciate the super chat and the well wishes. So thank you very much, and Merry Christmas to you also. Converse contender for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Love these. Hate I have to watch most back later. Well, we do what we must. Not all of us can be here at this time to watch them, and I understand completely. Work does take precedence. You have obligations. We all have obligations. So I'm just grateful that you're actually here and you gave a super chat, and I very much appreciate it. I'm just grateful you're here. Thank you very much for the super chat, and I hope you enjoy this on Watchback. Okay, I think Carrie Titus, I think that is, for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Dr. Falk, is there evidence Greeks were part of the Exodus who returned to Greece while in the wilderness, according to Jacobovich? Merry Christmas. Oh no. Oh boy. Oh, Simca. Wow, no. Now, there was a lot of mixed multitude amongst the lot of nations represented in the mixed multitude that followed the Israelites out of Egypt. Greeks weren't one of them. It is. Let's see here. How do I put this? The Greeks have their first sort of connections to Egypt during the reign of Ramses III. This is actually long after the Exodus, about 100 years after the Exodus. Okay? So that's when the first sort of diplomatic relationships are established between Egypt and Greece, at least as far as we know. The earliest trading colony at that the Greeks established in the Nile Delta is Naucratis, and that's 7th century BC. So I don't think that the Greeks were at all part of the Exodus. Now, with that said, I have watched the Exodus Decoded. It's atrocious. I think it's just a dreadful and obnoxious piece of scholarship. I do a popcorn video on this. Honestly, this would be prime fodder for a popcorn video. Except Jacobovich has this tendency for frivolous lawsuits, so I'm not going to even risk it. But you got my opinion here on this. I think it's not good at all. So anyway, Merry Christmas. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Tony G again for $19.99. Well, thank you very much. I see your super chats are getting more generous. Wow, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, did Egypt have a hand in the collapse of the United Israelite Monarchy? Yes. The Bible blames Solomon, but enemies of Solomon, including Hadad the Edomite and Jeroboam, took refuge and succor in Egypt. 1 Kings 11, 17, and 40. Yes, absolutely. Shoshank loved meddling in foreign affairs. That's one of the things he really liked to do. He liked meddling in foreign affairs. Now, with that said, it didn't help matters, but it wasn't the cause of the collapse either. We do have, testimony from the Book of Kings that the reason for the collapse was actually Rehoboam. Now, Solomon was a narcissist. I mean, not to put it lightly, he was a narcissist. He used indentured, or basically labor taxation. So basically, the way that labor taxation works is that corvees of laborers were sent to Solomon as a form of taxation to build his pet projects. And Solomon was a great builder. Solomon loved to build things. He built the temple. He built his palace. He built his stables. He rebuilt several cities. He was a big builder. But Solomon also lived big too. He lived big. He played big. He had lots of horses. Lots of wives. I mean, he was a bit of a Donald Trump figure, honestly. You know, he's putting gold faucets in his in his bathrooms. You know, this is the way Solomon was. And people got kind of sick of this. People got kind of sick of the excesses of Solomon. And they accepted it because he was charismatic. But they're at this point, you know, after Solomon dies, you know, they're not tolerating it anymore. So they go up to Rehoboam and they say, hey, okay, you know, your father taxed us relentlessly. Time to ease up. And Rehoboam says, well, you know, if my father whipped you with whips, I'm going to whip you with scorpions. You know, and Rehoboam goes over the top with the rhetoric. And they basically go nuts to you. You know, the 10 tribes split off. The 2 remaining tribes, you know, form the kingdom of Judah. And that's where the split happens. The Hadad the Edomite and Jeroboam are more or less symptoms of Solomon's excesses. And Shoshank, he is capitalizing on this instability that's created by Solomon and then later on by Rehoboam. So, Egypt had a hand in it, but it wasn't the cause either. It's just that Egypt and Shoshank the First is capitalizing on this. It's capitalizing it for its own ends. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Sean Horton for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Will lead scholars to read 2 Kings 22:8 to see evidence that the law was created, not found at that time. Well, let's take a look here at 2 Kings. Here's 2 Kings 22, verse 8. It says, the text says, then Hilkiah the high priest said to Shaphan the scribe, quote, I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord. And Hilkiah gave the book to Shaphan, who read it. Okay. Basically, what leads scholars to conclude that the law was created, not found, is skepticism of the text. Essentially, what they say is, see, this is evidence. This is evidence that they didn't know what the law was prior to this. So, therefore, they didn't find the law. They wrote it. They created it. It's argument by skepticism. And it's an eisegetical reading of the text. They're reading something into the text that's not there to flip the text on its head. Okay? Because just simply a better reading of the text is to say, look, it says I found the book. It doesn't say I wrote the book. It doesn't say I copied the book. It says I found. Okay? And we do actually have examples of this in ancient history where, people would be rummaging around archives and all of a sudden find a great papyrus. The Shabaka stela, was a text that had been found in a royal archive and then written from papyrus onto stone. And it emphasizes the Memphite theology. So we do find this happening during certain periods of time where, people just rummage around, find something, and then copy it or transcribe it onto a different medium. So this does happen. But, secular scholars reading this as it's pure eisegesis. There's nothing in the text that actually would lead you to this conclusion, other than just the skepticism that, say, as Wellhausen said, prophets before the Pentateuch. Essentially, Wellhausen sort of posted the idea that prophets, the prophetic writings, the historical writings came before the Pentateuch itself. And it's backwards. It's totally backwards. But those sort of teachings in, say, the Academy live on. It's unfortunate, it's silly, it's terrible reading of texts, but it is the status quo. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Fencing Mitch for Australian $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Merry Christmas, Dr. Falk. Just finished work. Well, I'm glad you're off work, and Merry Christmas to you too. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. We do appreciate every super chat we get. It does help us to continue this work. It helps keep the lights on and things going. And, well, we had to, it helped us this week, particularly. My computer went down this week. It went to the silicon heaven where the calculators go when they die. And I did have to take a lot of time this week to, put things back together again, to do a repair on my computer. Fortunately, I'm very, very good with computers, so we did managed to get back up quickly, but things do get long in the tooth. Equipment gets old, equipment dies, and it does need to be replaced. And your super chats do help us to replace some of our old equipment. So we very, very much appreciate every super chat. It does help us to continue producing these videos, producing live streams like this, and continue to bring this information of archaeology, of Egypt, and the Bible to YouTube, so that everyone can appreciate it and benefit from it. And again, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And Merry Christmas to you too. Okay, Linguist Ammo for $5. Good to see you, friend, and thank you very much for the super chat. Merry Christmas to you and your family. What is your favorite whiskey? Ooh, oh, great question. The most important question of this whole live stream. Honestly, I mean that's the pivotal question. That's the greatest question of this super chat. Is what is my favorite whiskey? By the way, I do accept bottles of whiskey as donations. I'm not just I'm saying it. I do accept it. I wouldn't turn one away. Would never turn away a bottle of whiskey. My favorite brand of whiskey, and I can't afford it, so I only rarely have it, is Lafroig. I'm a big fan of smoky, peaty whiskeys. The smokier and peaty, the better. I like the sort of whiskeys that will take a hammer and smash you in the face with just an excess of flavor. So, that's I like the Elas. I really like the Ela Scotches. So that's my favorite whiskey. There are other brands of whiskeys I do like. I do like, even though it's a blended whiskey, I do like Smoky Grouse, Famous Black. It's a good peaty whiskey. It's a blend, but it's still more in my price range normally. So I do. I also like the 40 Creeks Copper Pot whiskey as well. So there's my sort of range of sort of whiskeys that I really do enjoy. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. And Merry Christmas to you too. Okay. RG Strategy for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Merry Christmas, Dr. Falcon. God bless. Well, God bless you too, and Merry Christmas. Good to see you here. It's always great when you can join us. I know you can't always because of your work obligations, but I very much appreciate seeing you here, and very much appreciate the well wishes. So thank you very much. Merry Christmas to you, and God bless you also. Okay, that's the end of the super chats. Now let's go back and let's take some non-super chats. Let's see here. Another important question. Ooh. Warrior of the Most High asks, at Ancient Egypt the Bible, Merry Christmas, Dr. Falk. Hope you are well. Question, what kind of cake do you have this Christmas? Ooh, glad you asked. Now, cake for me has become a challenge. I am a diabetic. I have chosen not to treat my diabetes with insulin and metformin, but using a ketogenic diet, and that has been highly successful for me. It reversed my diabetes in about 2 weeks. So I went from a diabetic to having normal blood sugar. But I also know if I go back to a regular high carb diet, a standard American diet, I'm going to go back on, become a diabetic again. So I really can't go back to that. So with that said, I'm on a ketogenic diet, and I stay on that for my health reasons. Now, with that said, I do still have cake. Just not always the same kind of cakes. There are cakes that I really, really do enjoy. And I often will eat cheesecake. I can have some cheesecakes. This Christmas, what we're going to have is a keto chocolate silk cake. So that's going to be my cake for Christmas this year. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Interesting question. I do enjoy these questions. Personal preferences and flavors. So and have a Merry Christmas. Thank you very much for the well wishes. Okay. Regular question from Cataphract3. And he asks, did bars exist in ancient Near East and Israel? Were they anything like our modern conception? No. The closest thing you had in Egypt was a tavern. Okay? Now, at a tavern, you could get slosh drunk. They did provide wine. They did provide beer sometimes. They even provide strong drink. Now, strong drink, sometimes you'll see this, is a double fermented wine that could get to up to 18% ABV, absolute alcohol or alcohol by volume. So that's potent. You know, that's a wine that's going to knock your socks off. So they did have this in the ancient Near East, this strong drink. And the way taverns worked was you would sort of check in, you would get drunk. They would provide you with a meal too. So for your pay, you would get enough wine or beer to get totally sloshed. You would get something to eat, you know, usually some meat stew of some kind, often of lamb. They would then provide a bed for you to flop in and a prostitute to sleep with you. And that's the tavern experience. That's the tavern experience in a nutshell. And there was a fair number of these taverns throughout the ancient Near East. So they weren't isolated. People did set these up. And they were actually combinations of bars and brothels. They were also places that fomented insurrection. If there was ever a conspiracy done by the king against the king, these conspiracies would often take place inside of these brothels, these taverns. And so also government agents of the king, local king, would also be at these taverns, sort of spying out the tavern to make sure that nothing was hinky was happening, because these were also sort of dens of malcontent and insurrection. So they had something like bars, but not exactly the same. They weren't exclusively drinking establishments. They're sort of more like the drinking establishments of the Wild West, where they were a combination of bar and brothel. So, that's the answer to that question. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, let's find another question. I'm going to take Chow Yi's here. Dr. Falk, considering the canonical age for the priests, why was Zedekiah still actively serving in Luke 1 despite already being elderly? Okay, he wasn't actually actively serving. He was sort of on the periphery. He couldn't actually do temple service, but he was still a priest. Now, once you're consecrated as a priest, you don't become unconsecrated as a priest once you hit retirement age. What happens once you hit retirement age is you're no longer allowed to do temple service, but you can still hang around. You're still allowed to come to the temple. You're still allowed to hang out in the courts. You're still allowed to teach. You're still allowed to share your wisdom to the younger generation. It is a way... Yeah, okay. My wife correctly points out it's like being a professor emeritus, where you're retired, but you're still contributing to the community. So that's what's happening with Zechariah. He's retired. He can't serve as a priest anymore, but he's still giving his wisdom to those who want to receive it. So the temple system did allow you to do this. So he can't take the sacrifices, he can't take the burnt offerings, he can't do any of that sort of sacrificial work, that labor of sacrifices and petitions and that sort of thing. But he can still teach, and he's still allowed inside the temple, and he's still considered a priest. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. It is an interesting question, though, because, you would think, he's retired, he can't be a priest anymore. Doesn't work that way. You're never unconsecrated. It's sort of like the oath that you take in the army. Once you take that oath, there's no, just because you're retired from the army doesn't mean you're relieved of that oath. Or the Boy Scouts, same thing. That oath, you're never relieved of that oath. You're still in that consecration, as it were. So, thank you very much for the question. Interesting question. Okay. I see a super chat here, so let's go grab that. Okay. Tom Wamchek for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Greatly appreciate that. I think Josephus and later scholars held Greek philosophy was influenced by originating from Hebrew thought. Do you agree? 1 Kings 4:34 points to this. Now, I'm going to read 1 Kings 4:34. Then I'm going to give you my opinion on this. Okay, 1 Kings 4:34 reads, "And men came from all peoples to hear the wisdom of Solomon, from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom." Okay. Now, we have to understand that when Josephus is writing here, he is having a intellectual battle with Arnian. And basically the intellectual battle is, which culture do we accept as being the supreme culture? There was a thinking in the first century that whichever culture was oldest is the most right, and it became a sort of this cultural race between the Greeks and the Hebrews as to which culture was older and thus superior. Which one should you listen to? And Josephus did participate in this intellectual debate. And I think my thoughts on this is, there is wisdom literature in the ancient Near East. Definitely in the 9th century, definitely in Mesopotamia, definitely in Egypt. Every culture had a form of wisdom literature. However, we happen, in the case of Greek philosophy, we do have testimony from Greek sources as to where they got the thought from. So, writers like Sophocles basically say that the Greeks got philosophy from the Egyptians. And he's not the only one who says it. It was early Greek writers. A lot of them traveled to Egypt. We'd already mentioned that Naucratis had been set up in the 7th century BC, so that people from Greece were already traveling to Egypt, and then traveling from there into, say, to Giza, to Memphis, and down the Nile River. So by, say, the 4th and 5th centuries BC, Egyptian tourism from Greece was very active. It was very, very active. And a lot of Greek philosophers, it was even said at one point that you're not a credible Greek philosopher until you've seen Egypt, until you've traveled there, until you've explored the world and its most important site, Egypt. Okay? So with all that evidence there, it's really, really hard to take Josephus's opinion here as, I mean, Josephus is correct in that 1 Kings 4:34 predates Greek philosophy, but it is also not the ontology of Greek philosophy. So we have to be a little careful here again with taking Josephus at face value, just because there's so much evidence in this that points the other way. So I think Greek philosophy definitely has its roots in Egyptian philosophy. I really don't think there's any question of that. You look at, say, the writings of Hermetic, of say the Thoth cult in Egypt. You see the threads, the seminal threads of Greek philosophy there. So, like the Book of Thoth, for example. So it's there. It's there in Egyptian thought. It's there in, say, even late Ramesside thought, and it's there in the testimony from the Greeks themselves. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that answered your question. I very much appreciate the super chat. Okay. See here, I saw another super chat from Sean Horton for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do we know what humor looked like in the ancient Near East? Well, yeah, we do. If so, does it translate well? Sometimes. Or did you just have to be there? Yes. If you want an example, here's the thing. There is humor in the ancient Near East. We do find it in both Hebrew literature and we find it in Egyptian literature too. Now, in Egyptian literature, it tends to be more or less people take biographies that they found written on the walls that were so laughably ridiculous that they just copied them. Copied these biographies and repeated them. One that sticks to mind is, say, the Tale of Wenamun. Now, it's very, very clear. I look at the Tale of Wenamun and I think, wow, this looks a lot like a biography that was written on a tomb wall. And I can pretty much guess what happened. It was somebody went into Wenamun's tomb, which people did. People went into other people's tomb to read the biographies. There's a public. Every tomb has both a public and private area. The private area is the burial chamber. No one's supposed to be. It's a defilement to go into the burial chamber. But the antechamber was generally, in most tombs, public access. You could go into the antechamber of most tombs, and you could read their biography. See their deeds. Give them offerings. It was supposed to be semi-public. So, I bet you once somebody went into the tomb of Wenamun and goes, "Oh man, this guy is a schmuck." Copied down his biography and started passing around copies. Because it is funny. It's really hysterically funny. It's ridiculous. Now, with that said, too, we do also find some humor in Hebrew literature, in the Bible even. Like, for example, Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Where, he's saying to them, well, where's your God? Is he on the toilet? Is he on vacation? These are rude jokes meant to poke fun at the opposing god. So, you do find these in, and I wish sort of, I wish someone would sort of, when they do these translations of the Hebrew text, would not do it so dryly, because there is very much a humor aspect to these. There's another one, which is very, very funny too, which is Thomas, the Apostle Thomas. We call him Doubting Thomas. And Thomas says in one of the Gospels, Jesus says, Lazarus, he Jesus gets word of that Lazarus had died, and Jesus goes, he waits 3 days, and then Jesus finally says, "Well, let's go back to Jerusalem and raise Lazarus, or go visit Lazarus." And Thomas goes, the text literally says, "Oh, wonderful! Let's go and die with him." Thomas was a smartass. It is very funny when you read it in the Greek. It's very, very funny. And I just wish that some of that, a little more of that was conveyed, because it humanizes these people. These people had humor. They weren't these dry sort of monastic sticks in the mud. They were living, breathing human beings, and they had humor, and frankly, some of that humor can still be enjoyed by us today. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that answered your question. Frodojack with a $5 super chat. Thank you very much for the super chat. Feliz Navidad from Southern California. Oh, beautiful place, Southern California. Merry Christmas to you too. Very much appreciate the well wishes and the super chat. Thank you very much. Very much appreciated. And I hope you have a great new year too. Okay. I think that's the last of the super chats. Let's get some more non-super chat questions. Okay. Let's see here. And see where I left off here. If someone is being rude, block them. Yeah, we don't tolerate people being rude on this channel, and we do so. We have some very simple rules here, which is be kind, be respectful, and if you can't be kind or respectful, we will put you in the timeout. So, we just want to keep that. We want to keep the dialogue here civil. We just want to keep it civil. So, let's see here. Okay. I'm going to take this non-super chat first, and I did see a super chat come through. So, but JG Studios asks, "What do you think is the most probable for the birth of Jesus? What time?" I think it was in the spring. The reason is because it seems to have occurred, say, after the harvest, and during, say, just after the wet season. So it does appear to be in the spring. So probably around March or April. That seems to be the most probable time for the birth of Jesus. So again, this is not the traditional dating. The traditional date of December 25th actually comes, I believe, from the feast. It's 9 months after the Feast of the Annunciation. So when Mary's told she's going to conceive the Holy Spirit, 9 months later is December 25th. So that's where we get the December 25th date. But it was probably in the spring, just after the harvest, and before the barley harvest. So after the winter rains, essentially after the winter rains. So that made it much easier to travel when you didn't have, say, the flash floods, the wadis, and that sort of thing. So after the winter rains and before the barley harvest. So sometime around then. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question. Okay. And I saw a super chat here from Cheese1 for $25 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Hi, Dr. Falk. Was wooden ritual furniture more common going back to the Old Kingdom due to more trees? Or was rarity considered more auspicious for religious ceremony going forward to the times of greater human impact? Okay. We do find wooden ritual furniture going back to the Old Kingdom. Absolutely. Now, when you get into sort of the later periods like the New Kingdom, what you do start seeing is a lot more imported woods. Woods start becoming more imported as they become scarce, or as, say, like exotics. There are some exotic woods that the Egyptians do very, very much value and prize. Like, for example, cedar. Cedar from Lebanon. Egypt doesn't grow any cedar. But cedar was imported from Lebanon during the New Kingdom period. We also find ebony. Ebony is imported from Africa. So ebony is you have ebony in imports. You have other trees too that are imported as well. And some of these trees are turned into, say, ritual furniture. In, say, the Old Kingdom, you tend to find more local varieties of trees being used, particularly olive trees, acacia. Acacia is a lot of furniture in, say, the Old and Middle Kingdom was made of acacia wood. You still see some acacia wood into, say, the early New Kingdom, but that sort of starts to trickle out at the end of around Dynasty 19, Dynasty 20. You start seeing transition to more imported species or even recycled wood at that point. They do recycle wood. Egypt does recycle wood because it is a very precious commodity. Egypt still had forests right up until the Middle Kingdom. In the southern area of Kush, there were forests there still, and one of the texts we have, hired or not hired, conscripted Magi to go and log the forests of Kush to provide wood logs for the Egyptians, and that happens in the Middle Kingdom around Dynasty 11. So we find that pretty much the forest reserves had been pretty much depleted. They were depleted by the New Kingdom, and then they are completely, trees, at least most of the big trees are gone by Dynasty 20. So it's at that point they have to start importing more and more wood for their ritual furniture and recycling furniture. So we do find lots of boxes from the Old Kingdom. Thankfully, a lot of them were well preserved, and that made my study of this easier. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. It's a great question. Thank you very much for the super chat, and have a great and Merry Christmas. Thank you so much. Okay. And another question. Let's see here. I'm going to start here from the bottom here and work my way up. Okay. JG Studios had a question here. What path would you suggest for a high school student, college-wise, that wants to further in biblical studies and live comfortably? Well, if you want to live in comfortably, don't go into biblical studies. Go into finance and accounting. It's biblical studies is not the path to wealth. It is not the path to living comfortably. You will live very uncomfortably as a student if you go down biblical studies. That's just the way it is. Um, if you want to pursue biblical studies, it has to be for other reasons, because there's no money and there's probably no job at the end of it. Your chances, because competition in biblical studies is so fierce, your chances of being hired once you do reach that terminal degree is very small. It's very, very small. So, with that said, sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. You got to do it for other reasons. You got to do it because you really love it. If you do it because you love it, it doesn't matter if you get a job at the end of it. But you're not going to be living comfortably. There are other fields you should take if you want to live comfortably. It's one of those things you have, biblical studies, living comfortably, pick one. Pick one. And I'll say this, biblical studies is worth it. I found it personally worth it. It has not been financially. It has not led to financial rewards. It's led to other kinds of rewards. It's led to rewards of wisdom. It's led to other blessings. It can be greatly rewarding. The one way it will not reward you is financially. So anyway, I hope that puts that into perspective. But I do still encourage people to pursue biblical studies if that's where the Lord is leading them and that's where their passion is. So anyway, thank you for that question. Okay, let's see what else we got here. And what is your opinion of Ben Stanhorn's view of Genesis? I don't really know his view. Honestly, I have not read his view. I know he's very, very critical of young Earth creationism. I have some concerns with young Earth creationism as well. I know he's very, very critical of, say, the Creation Museum of Ken Ham, and I don't blame him. I think there's real cause there to be concerned and cautious. But I don't know what his biblical views as far as Genesis goes. So anyway, I thought I'd stop. I thought I'd give that a quick answer, but I'm not sure of his views there. Ooh, another probing question from RG Strategy. Ham or turkey? I don't know. That's a tough one. I do like turkey and I do like ham. I like them both. I do love tomorrow night it's going to be turkey. And it's going to be slow cooked turkey. It's going to be turkey that's going to be slowed over slow roasted over 12 hours. So, very, very slow roasting. I do love slow roasted meats. Even roast beef, slow roasted. Oh, beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. But I don't actually have a preference for ham or turkey. I like them both. I tend to actually prefer seafood over both of them. So I'm actually, I grew up in Vancouver. I grew up on salmon and various seafoods, clams, mussels. So I tend to actually prefer seafood when given the option. So that's sort of my perspective here. But thank you for the question. Okay, I see another super chat here from Tom Wanchek for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, is Moses infant? I think in Moses's infant narrative floated down the Nile, found by a princess, properly understood by modern readers? No, it isn't. Almost feels miraculous. It isn't. Honestly, it's not miraculous. Now, first of all, he's not floated down the river. That's a misconception. And again, we kind of think of when a lot of readers, when they approach the text here, they kind of think they're just chucking the basket in the river and it's just like washing down the river like a whitewater rafting ride, and that's really not what's going on here. He's not just floated down the river. And frankly, the Nile's a very slow moving river anyway. It's a very, very slow moving river. So if you just threw a basket on the river in the Nile, it wouldn't get very far very fast. So it's what's happening here is that the text says that the basket was placed among the reeds. So it's not actually allowed to free float out there. The basket is actually sort of anchored to the shore through the reeds. It's almost placed in a spot where someone would come across it and discover the basket, in hopes that someone would take mercy upon the child. So I don't think there's a miraculous element here, but I think there is an element here of human planning. And you could say, even through the human planning, that there's a divine plan going on here. And definitely that's true, but it's not miraculous per se. Everything is happening within, say, the laws of nature, and within, say, causal reality. God is not defying any natural law here, or any, say, doing anything as a violation of natural law. And really, the basket itself is not left to chance. It's really not left to chance. It's even possible that they put it among the reeds so that if someone didn't come by later on, they could come by and retrieve it. So there's sort of this idea that the basket would not be getting too far. So anyway, so this is not a Sargon of Akkad issue. In the Sargon of Akkad birth narrative, he's supposed to be put in that basket and just, he's chucked into the Euphrates, and the Euphrates carries him way downstream. This is not like that at all. This is not even close to that. So there's some oversight and control of this. And Moses' sister is watching the basket. She's watching the basket from a distance. This is a very, very different thing. This is a leave it out to someone to find it, but supervise it to make sure nothing goes wrong. So that's what's happening here. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. Thank you very much for the super chat, and I very much appreciate that. It's a great question too. Okay. Tony G again for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. The Star of Bethlehem, natural phenomenon or miraculous? Were the Magi Babylonian or Persian? And turkey, smoke over wood, and charcoal. Ooh, smoky meat. I love smoky meat. Smoky meat, smoky whiskey. Oh, smoky sausage. Oh, you're making me hungry. Good going. Good going. Broadcast over. Time to eat. Just kidding. The Star of Bethlehem. It does seem to be a natural phenomenon. Now, one of the things about it is that it seems to be some sort of conjunction. And it seems to be a conjunction that is interpreted by Persian, or at least Parthian at this point, because at that point Persia is part of the Parthian Empire. There is at this point an influence of Zoroastrianism in the religion there, and there does seem to be, like for example, we find, say, divination tables written in Akkadian. Assume these would be in Persian as well, although I'm not an expert in Persian literature. These divination tables are kind of similar to the dream papyrus we find in in Chester Beatty 3, where an event happens and with it is an interpretation. So some oracle way back wrote these tables that if X happens, then this is happening. If Y happens, this is happening. Z happens, this is happening too. Okay? And Persian Zoroastrian astronomy seems to follow these sort of divination tables. So when they find a conjunction happen in a certain constellation, they look it up in their divination table and say, well, this is the meaning. So it's not that they're getting some sort of divine revelation explicitly from the star itself, or that it happens in a certain way. But it does seem to be that that there is this conjunction happening in the sky, which is conjunction is when two planets come together within a constellation or a planet and a star to produce a brighter star. Okay, a brighter astronomical event. And depending on how close those get, the brightness can get quite bright. There's even a possibility that there's a nova. I mean, that's even a possibility too. However, a conjunction is probably more likely. So they're seeing this event in the sky. It's in a certain constellation. They're going to look it up in their divination table. They're going to come to that and they're going to go, oh, constellation this or conjunction in this constellation. Ah, King of the Jews is being born. Now, how did they arrive at that oracle is another question. We're not sure about that. Could this have been, say, I mean, there's some possibility that while the Judahites were in Babylon, and or Esther, when she was under the Jewish community of Esther's in the Persian Empire, you know, maybe among them they had already talked about a Messiah, a King of the Jews. You know, and that might have been that might have gone into the divination tables. So very, very likely that's what's going on here as far as, say, the Star of Bethlehem. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. That seems to be the most likely scenario for this, given the culture and the context that we find it in. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Merry Christmas and enjoy your smoky meats. Okay. 501 Mobius for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Merry Christmas, ho ho ho. Okay. Oh, Saint Nicholas. Oh, you scoundrel. Santa Claus. I do have to admire Santa Claus. Punching Arius in the mouth. That's true apologetics, you know, with a right hook. Yeah. Yeah, Santa Claus isn't the nice jovial fat elf that he's Saint Nicholas isn't the jovial fat elf as he's made out to be, you know. He was a firebrand. I mean, he was a tough guy. You know, goes down. Saint Nicholas is at the Council of Nicaea. He is at the Council of Nicaea, and he walks down the steps of the basilica, and he gives Arius of Alexandria a right hook and drops him to the floor. Gosh, I love the guy. You know, you sometimes think you'd love to deal with heretics like that today. You can't, obviously, but you know, you gotta admire that. even though we don't we shouldn't do that today. We should not do that today. But I still have to respect it. So, hey, thank you very much for the super chat. Merry Christmas to you also, and God bless you. Okay. Let's see here. Let's find some more non-super chat questions. So more non-super chat questions. Looking for it. All right. DN Silvar asks, could Eden work if evolution was true and we came out from Africa? How so? I one of the things we have to understand about Eden is the holy of holies within the temple of creation. It's the holy of holies. It's where God meets with man. Okay, so that's why Eden is guarded by the cherubim. It's a special place. It's a special place within the creation. Now, I'm not going to take a side on the evolution creation debate because I haven't decided it myself. Okay, so I don't know if evolution is true or not, honestly. I have my doubts. Honestly, I have scientific doubts that evolution is true. Just like I have doubts that young earth creationism is true from a biblical standpoint. So I'm not going to take a side there. I have my doubts about the whole out of Africa thing also. So I am not going to pick a side there, but if it were true, and I'm saying that's just as a hypothetical, if it were true, it wouldn't affect the Eden narrative because Eden is a sequestered area within creation itself. It's special. It's supposed to be special. It's sacred. And it's the sacred garden where God meets with man. So, can't answer the question about the rest, but I don't think it would affect Eden per se. That's my honest opinion there. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Ooh, another super chat from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sorry, last super chat. Don't never apologize for a super chat. I love super chats. It keeps us going. Never apologize for a super chat. Is it possible that the anointing oil was made with cannabis besides calamus? No. Just read the Exodus effect. Oh, don't do that. No, cannabis was not. The holy anointing oil is very well documented. It's prescribed. It's sacred. It's sacred. It was the art of the perfumer. It was not supposed to be used in any other way. There's no indication that cannabis was even found in Israel. There's some cannabis species that are in Southeast Asia, but there's no evidence that it was ever in the Middle East until modern times. I don't think here that the holy anointing, and even if the holy anointing oil were made of cannabis, what would be the point of that since it's topical? No one drank the holy anointing oil. No one ingested it. It was sacred. It was meant to be touched upon someone's forehead or their hands, perhaps. But it was never supposed to be ingested. Moreover, there's more than enough. We have the formula. The formula is in the scriptures. It's made from a variety of herbs and spices, but cannabis is not one of them. And I don't think there's even a candidate in amongst that could even remotely be identified as cannabis. So I just think this is eisegesis. This is reading something they want to read into the text, and I think they're out to lunch here. So anyway, thank you for the super chat. Again, never apologize for it. Merry Christmas, and I do very much appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay, again, let's go more non-super chats here. I'm gonna see here. Question: wasn't the story of Saint Nicholas punching Arius a made-up legend? Might have been. Still fun. Because I see many questioning the historicity of that cool story. Now, we do know he was there. Okay, we do know that Nicholas was at Nicaea. That much is true. Whether or not he punched him, well, that's another matter. But it's a fun story, and I do love it anyway. But it is also true that he voted for the Homoousius camp. He was a Homoousian. He was not an Arian. So he did have an intense hatred of Arians. So even if the legend itself is made up, it does express sort of the sentiment that saint expressed towards Arians. So that much is true, and he was physically there at Nicaea. He was one of the bishops there. So may have been made up, but then again, maybe not. So possible, but it's also consistent with his character too. So don't vouch for it, but still a fun story. Okay, let's see here. More here. Let's see here. Mask of Shy. Have you heard about the book, The Language of Creation by Matthew Pegu? He has a deep and quite insightful reading of Genesis. No, I have not. I've not read that. Also, fruitcake or pie. Oh, fruitcake. I can't eat it anymore. As much as I love fruitcake and I adore fruitcake, I'm not allowed to have it anymore. Too much sugar. Too much sugar. Way too much sugar. But I loved fruitcake of every kind, except for the one that's mostly bread, mostly cake. No, that's not. I mean, real good fruitcake with frankenfruit. I even like that. I like the ones that are made of the high type of fruitcakes that are made of like chopped apricots and dried apricots and raisins and currants and that's really good though. You know, that's the top tier of fruitcake. Oh, that's so wonderful. But I also like the lowbrow fruitcake of just frankenfruit. You know, like candied cherries, candied pineapple, kind of all that candied fruit as well. But it has to have a high fruit ratio. Has to have a high fruit ratio. I don't like British fruitcake. I hate British fruitcake. British fruitcake is mostly bread cake with a few pieces of fruit scattered in there. No, I like that compact, compressed loaf of dried fruit. That's just, oh. And then with rum poured over it just before cutting, beautiful, absolutely delicious. And as I say, I love both the highbrow and the lowbrow version of that. Adore fruitcake, cannot eat it anymore. But that's the answer to your question. Thank you very much for the question. Okay, I'm gonna take this one here. To think of truth. Okay, many claim that December 25th is pagan origin. However, the Church Fathers already considered December 28 as important date 200 AD before the earliest pagan Aurelian died in 274 AD. Any comments or thoughts about this? Yes, I do have a couple thoughts about this. It is absolutely true that the Church Fathers were already celebrating December 25th prior to Aurelian. Absolutely true. It's absolutely true. It's throughout the Church Fathers. And it's based roughly on the Feast of the Annunciation, where Mary receives the message that she's going to conceive by the Holy Spirit. So that's the basis. Now, 9 months after that feast is the 25th of December. 9-month pregnancy? Get it? Haha. Okay. Now, the pagan festival of Saturnalia actually takes place on December 17th. So it is actually just before December 25th. So it's Christians are not taking this from Saturnalia. They're not taking it because the festival happens too early. So I don't see any basis or any warrant for saying that that the celebration on December 25th is pagan. Now, at the same time, too, I don't think it's the traditional birth date, the actual day that Christ was born. As mentioned in an earlier super chat, we already had talked about that Christ was probably born in the spring, after the end of the winter rains. So probably March or April. So anyway, thank you very much for the questions. Good question, though. Very much appreciated. Okay. Question. What is your opinion on Stoic philosophers? Who is your favorite? I'm not a great fan of Stoic philosophers. I mean, Marcus Aurelius is kind of, it's a Stoic philosopher, but, I was actually much more interested in the Epicureans. I think they're more interesting. Stoic philosophers are quite actually dull in comparison. At least the Epicureans say, okay, you experience, but not to excess. Whereas Stoics believed in, deprival. Deprival. You don't let your emotions get out of control. You don't let you bottle it all in. And okay, yeah, that's kind of dull. But I found actually the Epicureans to be much more interesting as far as early Greek philosophers. So that's sort of my opinion there. So thank you for the question, though. It's an interesting question. I've never gotten that question before. Okay. I see a super chat here from Sean Horton for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Are there works referred to in the Old Testament that have actually survived, unlike the Acts of the Solomon mentioned in 1 Kings 11:41? Is there anything more than conjecture over why? Not really. We do find new works that are referenced in the New Testament that have survived, but not really of the Old Testament. Now, there are several, say, pagan works that are referenced in the Old Testament. This is called intertextuality. It is the idea that any text is grounded in its culture. It's grounded in its literary culture. It's going to quote from other sources in its culture. And where the Bible is being written is a thoroughly pagan culture. So the Bible is going to invariably quote from pagan sources just because of intertextuality. This shows that the Bible is actually grounded. It's not a fantasy work that's created carte blanche. It's a book that's interfacing and interacting with a huge variety of different sources and cultures. Now, why didn't those books survive? That's a good question. Archaeological preservation is a very tricky thing. It's a very tricky thing. Some things survive, some things don't. The fact is that much of what we have is, at least from, say, the Levant, was written on parchment. And parchment is essentially sheepskin. It's dried and stretched sheepskin. And Israel can sometimes be a little wet. It can sometimes be a little wet. So because it's wet, parchment tends to rot. So a lot of, say, the books we have didn't survive, even to the 1st century. So, preservation is just sort of sometimes a random thing. Sometimes we get lucky and find a text that we didn't expect, but it's a lucky find. Like one of the things is, for example, let's take, for example, the poetry of Sappho of Lesbos. She was a Greek poet, and throughout the 2,000 years since she died, there was only a very small number of her poems that survived. Only about, I think, about 6. Not a lot of her work survived. But in the 1870s, with the discoveries of Oxyrhynchus, they started finding other works of Sappho. They found a lot of other works of Sappho. It turned out she was quite a prolific poet. Now, we read those poems today, and how can I say this? They're crap. There's a reason they didn't survive. They didn't survive because they weren't good. They were really, really, really cringy poems. So in that case, what we see in the case of Sappho of Lesbos is what gets preserved is the good stuff, and the stuff that isn't so good is just left to rot. Now, is that what's happening here with, say, the books of the Acts of Solomon? In the case of the books of the Acts of Solomon, that's probably internal palace chronicles here that are being kept and then ultimately being compiled in First Kings. And what we see in, say, First Kings is it's a compilation of many sources. First Kings, First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles are compilations of many, many sources. So the Israelites, the Judahites particularly, they go into exile into Babylon. And once they're in Babylon, they have all these various books that they sort of scooped up from the palace, and they bring them with them. And once they're in Babylon, they start compiling them to form the books of Kings and Chronicles. So once they had done that compilation, they had, say, the master copy, the big compilation, and they didn't actually need those smaller books anymore. They served their purpose as sources, but they weren't as important as, say, the reference book. It's like, well, you can haul around 20 books, or you can take one with you. It's just more convenient to use, say, Kings or Chronicles, as opposed to, say, carrying these 20 manuscripts around with you. So, and some of this is that they're I think extracting the best out of, say, the Acts of Solomon, but they're not all of that information is important or relevant. If some governor comes up to the throne of Solomon and says, "Hey, here's my payment of taxes," yeah, that's gonna get recorded in the Acts of Solomon. But is it important? Well, that's the function of editorial, of editors, is that they sort of weed out what's important and what isn't. Now, granted, I'd love to see the Acts of Solomon myself. I'd love, as a scholar, I'd love to get my hands on the source texts. That would be absolutely fantastic. I mean, that would be a scholar's dream. But I also recognize that the virtuosity here of the editors here in choosing what he thought was important for the people in his generation. And that's what we have today, and that's what survived. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Great super chat, and have a Merry Christmas. Thank you very much. Okay. We're almost hitting 2 hours now. So I'm only going to take a couple more questions, and then we are going to call it a night. Let's see here. I'm going to take Cataphract's 3 question here. Did Jewish ideas of the afterlife borrow from Zoroastrianism, in your opinion? No. No, they didn't. Every ancient culture had a view of the afterlife. Every last one of them. The Egyptians had a view of the afterlife. The Assyrians had a view of the afterlife. The Babylonians had a view of the afterlife. The Sumerians had a view of the afterlife. The people at Ugarit had a view of the afterlife. Everybody in the ancient world has a view of the afterlife. Why should the Israelites be any different? It was just ubiquitous in all ancient Near Eastern cultures. So no, I don't think they borrowed it from the Zoroastrians. I think they had a view of the afterlife already. and I think this was expressed in popular culture of the time. It starts to get recorded later on in the books of the prophets. It's not in Torah, because Torah is not about the afterlife. Torah is about how you live this life. So that when you do, so your posterity is blessed, the land is blessed, and you have a relationship with God. The afterlife in Torah is sort of an afterthought, because it's not about how you live the afterlife, it's how you live the now. But that's not to say they didn't have a view of the afterlife, because they're coming out of Egypt, and everybody in Egypt had a view of the afterlife. I mean, you can just... how can you come out of Egyptian culture and not have a view of the afterlife? I mean, the Egyptians were obsessed with the afterlife. Absolutely obsessed with it. So, you know, when we talk about, say, say the Egyptians, you know, almost everything that the Egyptians did went into their funerals. You know, they had, you know, coffins, ritual furniture, offerings, copies of the Book of the Dead to get them through the various stages of the Amduat, the Duat. So, you know, the Egyptians are absolutely obsessed with the afterlife. So I cannot see any reasonable possibility of Egyptians coming out of Egypt, or sorry, Israelites coming out of Egypt without some concept of the afterlife. So that's my opinion. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, we have one more super chat here. From CNMK for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Were ancient Egyptians healthy and have a good diet? No. They were not healthy, and they did not have a good diet. They had, in some respects, a better diet than some other people in the ancient Near East. Now, one of the, when we talk about the health of Egyptians, there was a chronic shortage of food in Egypt. Even though they were often better off than, say, neighboring countries, there was still a chronic famine in Egypt. And most Egyptians lived within 50 calories of starvation. So there was knife-edge agriculture in Egypt. Now, the typical Egyptian diet consisted of bread, mostly wheat-based or emmer-based. So the Egyptians didn't suffer from vitamin A deficiency blindness like we find in, say, Levantine cultures. Like, for example, the blind men that we find in the New Testament. A lot of the blindness that Jesus miraculously cures is caused by basically a barley-based diet. One of the things about a barley-based diet is it's extremely vitamin A deficient. That coupled with a low-protein diet, and Egyptian diets, Levantine diets were generally low-protein diets. There was not a lot of fresh meat available. So most of, say, your poorest people often went blind because of vitamin A deficiency. You didn't have that in Egypt since most people ate emmer, which is a kind of wheat. But what you did have is other forms of malnutrition. You did have, you had instances of scurvy. You did have instances of quasi-occur, you know, where you have protein deficiency. Meat was scarce in Egypt. Even though, say, the upper class had more access to meat through eating beef, salted fish. Salted fish is very deficient in vitamins. There would be there was not a lot of protein in, say, the Egyptian diet. So you got a lot of malnutrition in Egypt. That said, most Egyptians were, as of course, very thin as opposed to it. So obesity was not a problem in Egypt. Not until 5 years ago had obesity been seen in Egypt for much of any time. It's only just like within the last 5 years that obesity has now become a problem in Egypt. And that's because food has become so plentiful in Egypt. So, anyway, I hope that explains the Egyptian diet and the general health status of ancient Egyptians. Not good. Just not good. But anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And have yourself a very Merry Christmas. And I will take one last non-super chat, and that'll be the last non-super chat. And then we are going to call it a night. And John, I'm not going to answer that question because you've repeated it now a half dozen times. So I'm very, very much I'm going to start getting really strict on not answering questions that are repeated. So I appreciate your question. I do see your question. I'm not going to answer it because I was very, very clear at the beginning of this that there are people who are sort of crossing that line of spamming us with questions. So appreciate it, but ask next time and ask only once. So I'm going to take a different question here, and so let's see here. Let's see, what's going to be our last question for the night? Let's see here. Last question for the night. Who do I pick? Hopefully there will be a fun question. Hopefully I can see a fun question here because I like fun questions. Just a comment, FTW. Thank you, Dr. Falk, for advice on publishing and thesis research. Sentinel Crew, FTW. You're most welcome. That was a lot of fun to do that. That little review of a review of a review of a review. I had a lot of fun on that. So it was my pleasure to sort of expose the world of academic publishing. Oh, definitely. Oh, I see one last question that I could take if I don't see anything else here. Okay, I'm going to take that one. That one looks good. I actually like this one. Last question. Sorry. Wrong one. Just hit that by mistake. Mask of Shy. This is going to be the last non-super chat of the night. It goes, any ancient Egyptian drink you would like to drink? Oh, yes, absolutely. The Egyptians had several drinks. They had several drinks. Let's talk about libations and Egypt, because there's actually some interesting stuff here. They of course drank water, generally from wells, because the river was full of parasites. I mean, the Egyptians noticed very early on that people who drank from the water got sicker and sicker and sicker over time. And that's because the Nile River is just polluted. It's polluted with parasites. Even if you go there today, don't drink from the Nile. Don't swim in the Nile. It's a one-way trip to the hospital. Don't do it. Just don't do it. So definitely don't do it. Even the water filters they have, the public water filters they have in Egypt, don't drink from those either because they never change the filters on those. So generally, your typical Egyptian, if he's smart or wealthy, he drinks beer. Egyptians did have beer, and they've had beer since the Old Kingdom. And I've tried the beer. The beer is actually quite good. I've made beer, Egyptian beer. It's actually quite wonderful. It's got sort of a lemony flavor to it. It's they drank it flat. They didn't carbonate it. When I made Egyptian beer, I both tried to I tried it flat and I carbonated it. And carbonated, it's wonderful. It's actually really, really wonderful. So I do actually like Egyptian beer. The and they actually had they made beer, Egyptian beer, but both barley loaves and with the addition of dates. Now, with the addition of dates, they also made three forms of wine. Okay, they made a date wine, they made a grape wine, and basically they imported Semitic Asiatics to be their vintners to make wine for them because it was a specialized skill. They also made wine from pomegranates. They didn't make it a lot, and it was used primarily within temple contexts, but it was still something that it was rare, it was expensive, and it actually sounds really, really yummy. So for me, if there's one Egyptian drink I would like to try, either make it myself or sample it, it would be pomegranate wine. So Slammer says, you really want to drink now, laugh out loud. Yeah, probably. She also adds, no one in Germany drinks water. Well, why would you when the beer's so good? Yeah, so absolutely, it's the Egyptian pomegranate wine was used a lot in temples. The king himself would drink it. Occasionally, they would give away as public beneficence to attract people to come to certain festivals, especially in areas where there's, say, a lot of religious competition. Like we have a historical text that says that during the festival at Heliopolis, the priests would give samples of pomegranate and grape wine to the common people as a form of public beneficence. So, I mean, I can't think of a better reason to go to church than to drink the wine. I mean, honestly. Just kidding. But with that said, however, this was considered to be a very, very good beverage to have. And as I said, I've only heard about it and I've never tried it myself. But if there's one I'd like to try, it'd be that one, the pomegranate wine. So, with that said, that's going to be the final question of the night. We have no more super chats, and we've already gone over 2 hours. So, I want to take this opportunity now to thank all our subscribers, to thank our Patreon supporters, and thank everyone who gave generously in their super chats tonight. We really, really appreciate it. I want to wish everyone on the channel here a very Merry Christmas, and I hope you have a great time during Christmas with your friends and family. And do remember the reason for the season, which is that the Lord Jesus Christ came down in the flesh to become man and to dwell with us so that he could bear the sins of humanity, and in so save us from death and give us everlasting life. Always remember that the manger is just the preamble to the cross. So with that said, I want to thank you very much. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And I want to wish everyone again a Merry Christmas. And I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night.